kick us off, we're going to start by our Norwegian fireside. We have Elisabeth Gulbrandsen joining us, who is a special advisor at the Research Council of Norway, currently engaged with RCN's experiments in developing, as TIP is often referred to, third generation science and innovation policy. This entails trying to foster knowledge, skills and capacities conducive to partnerships and collaborations. She has been with and against TIPC since its inception, and she is a TIPC governing board member. I think many of you will have met Elisabeth today. And also we have Per Koch, who is an editor of Nordic Research and Innovation Policy magazine. And I won't attempt to pronounce that, I'm afraid.
Forskningspolitik.
Thank you, Per. Perfect. He is a researcher at the Nordic Institute for the Studies of Innovation, Research and Education. He has worked in this area since the 1990s with the Research Council of Norway, the Norwegian Ministry of Education and Research, and Innovation Norway. He's been actively involved in EU, OECD, and UNESCO innovation activities. Welcome to Per. And finally, at our Norwegian fireside, we have Carla. Carla is from the TIPC research team, Carla Palvacino, and she is a research fellow at the Centre of Global Challenges at Utrecht University. She works on the Climate Kick Motion project, the Deep Transitions Research project, and is contributing to the development of the all-important TIPC handbook on transformations. So we'll probably hear a lot about co-creation in there. Their conversation is going to kick us off, and I love this theme, with the concept of being lost. Acknowledging being lost, questioning our identities and labels as part of this, and being able to reach, to listen, and to learn from others. So I'll now send you over to your Norwegian fireside and to Carla.
Hi, thanks. Can you hear me? Sorry, I was muted before.
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yes. Okay. Great. So it's great. It's great for me to have this opportunity to interview Elisabeth and Per. I've been working with Elisabeth for a while, and we learned a lot from her. Thinking of the conversation today and listening to your presentation and your colleagues this afternoon, I was thinking, what do I have in common with Norway? And I think you mentioned, or some of your colleagues mentioned, the crossing the rivers, and it made me think of the fjords in the end of the world. And since I come from the other end of the world, I guess that memory of being lost in the fjords is something that I guess we can share somehow. So I wanted to start with that question. I think in the session we had to prepare this conversation, you talk about getting lost as a metaphor to co-creation and as a part of the co-creation process. So I just wanted to ask you what has been your experience of getting lost, and how do you get lost in a productive way, let's say, or in a way that you helps you in your co-creation process?
Who is going to start on this one?
I don't know. Per, Elisabeth, whoever has felt the most.
Well, I'm partly responsible for this getting lost figuration, I think. Well, it goes back to my engagement with the feminist technoscience, really, where I think that getting lost is a kind of prerequisite. But it's also very challenging, of course, in expert communities and in communities who are very prone towards helping the suffering people out there. And this is kind of the research community that I met as a student. I heard it many times. Oh yeah, but the suffering people out there. And of course, this is legitimate and very important, but still, it was a kind of then research and the research institutions come up as a kind of shielded space. And I can still hear this talk about the real people in the real world out in the real woods, so to speak, getting lost in the woods. But to me, these institutions have grown into some very important societal actors with a lot of societal power. I mean, the weft of science, technology, and innovation is into everything that is really surrounding us today. So the loss of innocence is important in getting lost. And I think the loss of expertise to a certain extent, because what I see coming up now, and we can talk more about this, but it's really about what is excellence these days and what is progress these days. I mean, we are just having to turn a lot of these more, call them foundational concepts or whatever, upside down, I think, and get lost in them and find some new figurations perhaps to lead us on to some new metaphors to live by, as one of my coaches used to express it. I think I should stop there.
Yeah, thanks. No, but that gives a lot of food for thought. And I wanted to ask you, Per, because in our preparation, you mentioned that this getting lost for you was reflected on your experience working in public innovation and innovation in the public sector, as the kind of the limitations that public servants had to move beyond existing frameworks of their work. How would you relate to this metaphor from that perspective?
Well, you could turn this upside down and you might say, why weren't we lost before? Or at least, why didn't we feel that we were lost before this current conglomeration of crises like climate change, COVID-19, Trump, fascism, and so on? What happened? Why was it that people felt so comfortable and safe in the existing paradigms? And for me, there is two parallel processes that are very much alike. And given that we are talking about TIPC and the interaction between researchers and policymakers, I see the same kind of challenge on both sides, because I've been on both sides. So in policymaking, there's been a kind of stability because people have believed in the overall narrative that especially economists have been very fond of, that this is a rational world, it can be planned. If you invest in research and innovation, things will go by themselves. Much good will come out of it, and we will be able to solve all the problems we are facing. This has been the logic. But it's been also anchored in a kind of administrative, bureaucratic machinery, I would say, on the policy side, meaning that you are supposed to deliver on management by objectives, and even though management by objectives originally was meant to give you flexibility and freedom, it has become a kind of straitjacket. So you have a tendency of recruiting people that are very good at solving the problems within the machinery, kind of primary learning. While the secondary learning part, the people who are good at that, they have a tendency of leaving because it becomes too strict and narrow. But we see also on the other side, at the science side, a similar process towards, like the pop culture, publish or perish, where the indicators are forcing researchers to focus strongly on a narrow theme, which again is reinforcing the silos, which makes it even harder to approach the world in a holistic way, in the Renaissance way, in a way that is transdisciplinary and goes across social arenas, if you want. And I see some really horrible stories now, hear some really horrible stories even in Norway from researchers who say that, young researchers who say that, I can't do what I want now, I need to focus because I need to publish in the right peer-reviewed journals. I see the parallel to management by objectives. There's a very narrow objectives, and they are all defined in the past for the problems of yesterday. They are not oriented towards the future, and they are not really adapted to transformation, which is, of course, what we're looking at here. So I think it's not only a cognitive problem, it's a structural problem.
And because you mentioned, I like this idea that why we didn't get lost before. I mean, yeah. But if you think from your perspective as in Norway and Nordic countries, you've seen already some emergence of like the signals, people responding to this emergency signals. So Greta Thunberg, for instance, is one of the recent ones. But if we think of Elizabeth work as well, the responsible research and innovation work that she's been doing for quite a while before many other places, it's also there. I guess, would you say, something specific of the Nordic countries to deal with their with this emergency signals, with this breaks into structures? What is specific of the Nordic countries that would allow them or allow us or you as part of TIPC to explore this disruption points?
You're asking me?
I'm asking you both, but you can
okay.
go.
All right. What Elizabeth is doing and the Research Council is doing, and also a lot of people around in the system, there are catalysts, entrepreneurs. We used this word before. I often talk about innovation in the cracks. That is, the entrepreneurs in the policy system will have to find ways of changing the system from within. But there is one advantage, and I think that this is what you are thinking about. There's one advantage in a Norwegian setting, and you can probably expand this to a Nordic setting. That is that the cultures are pretty egalitarian even now. This means that if you have people around the table, it's easier to get all of them to speak. I can tell you, when I worked at the ministry the last time and you had meetings with a minister, and she was at the end of the table, obviously, and they invited a lot of people, not only the generals of the ministry, they invited the advisors and the consultants too. And then you would find, and I think this is pretty peculiar, really, you will find the young, newly employed advisors speaking against the minister in a friendly manner, obviously, but coming up with alternative ideas. And I don't think you will find that in countries which are much more hierarchical, much more, traditional. That's the advantage. In this society, it is possible, even now, to speak up against power and even discuss with power. It is possible.
And to turn, the question to Elizabeth, to a term that you often use, how does this, you often refer to changing the policy politics or the changing policy politics of research. I guess that's part of what Per was talking about. Right?
Well, yes, I absolutely agree with Per about the social contract and the things that we've had in the past, and I'm not sure whether this is kind of deteriorating, but I was thinking about two things when you spoke, Per. The one is this American feminist researcher crying out to her Nordic colleagues at the seminar many years ago, really frustrated, saying, "Oh, you Scandinavians, you're trusting the state too much," coming from the US, where she said, our government is, bombing their own inhabitants. I mean, so I have learned, I think, a lot from those researchers who are kind of, what should I say, activist analysts. They are both practitioners, they are hybrids, so politicians, they are citizen scientists, they are, I mean, so that's been my kind of inspiration, not so much, Per, from the Nordic researchers, and I think we've been a bit too complacent. I mean, maybe. And I also question, as I did earlier today as well, this where is power these days? you know, we have had this, as I said earlier, these reports on power and democracy in the Scandinavian or Nordic countries, except not Finland, but all the others at regular intervals. And they're all pointing out in the last round that power, I mean, the traditional political power has left the traditional political institutions. So I think that's what I think is about, you know, getting lost, rethinking, and so it's not about just thinking. It's also about living, embodiment, affections, all the things that has come up today, and I'm very grateful for that. Really, the situatedness of our lives that sort of presses itself through. So I think there are a lot of these more, as I said, foundational concepts that are, well, as you said, Per, they are also a product of the past.
I agree. I can see now from the time I worked in Innovation Norway, and we had all these very interesting open learning arenas, including companies and stakeholders and so on. And you could see power out there. And what really struck me was that there's been a huge change in the way, for instance, industry is operating in this area of innovation policy for sure, but social policy, transformation policy, and so on. Find young entrepreneurs, which normally should be traditional, a little bit conservative or libertarian. Now they are establishing firms for social change and social transformation, green economy, you know, clean economy. And it's amazing to behold. And they do have power. They do have strong influence, even if they don't necessarily interact with policymakers.
And can I just hang on to that a bit, because what really is inspiring me and drives me now is all these young techno-scientists that we are dealing with in our experiments in Norway. There are lots of young researchers now who are sort of seeing all this, the terrain changing sort of power in the more techno-science oriented projects that they inhabit. And they really want to become more societally responsible, and they really want to learn how to become citizens, as well as researchers and technologists and things like that. And I think we are getting some good results in some of our learning platforms about how you can stage this. And you know, this Carla, this fjord image, or the traversing of the stream, that came from one of these experiments that we have been doing and still are doing, and that there's a lot of people are very interested in this, and it comes a lot of good stuff out of it. And it's connected to the researcher school that I was telling about earlier. And you know, you gather people from diverse positions, and you get them out of the seminar rooms. You try to sort of myke up, soften their spines a bit, and you have some very, very prepared discussions going on while you, for instance, are walking in the mountains of Norway, a very diverse group. And it's been written about this as well, and all these more dislocatory moments that happens in such settings, I have great hopes for. But then, of course, this is something that the large, big institution must learn to listen to, these young voices.
That's a challenge.
Yeah,
some of you had a meeting with the Ministry of Modernization, which is a wonderful name for a ministry, but where one of them told me that they had a huge problem with Greta Thunberg, because they didn't know how to fit people like Greta Thunberg into the traditional way of handling hearings, input, policy development. Because they realized that she was more powerful than 10 prime ministers, but still, so they didn't know how to grasp that, which is, of course, institutions like TIPC. And these methods are so important to make them understand that Greta is not a threat. She is a source of inspiration.
Absolutely.
And you know what we were discussing after that, Per and Carla, it was this saying that we could have as a TIPC sort of what do you say, direction. It's make Greta great again and again and again and again.
Absolutely. So that was a great first discussion from Norway, talking metaphorically and actually about getting lost in the Norwegian mountains. So as Elizabeth said at the beginning, it's a prerequisite at the moment, and quite a challenge for those who are experts in their field, but that we need to look at the metaphors of previous progress. And Per asked, why did we not feel lost before? Why did people believe in the narrative? And that this narrative attracted people who were good at primary learning and fixing and bureaucracy. So what we need now are people who have the skills and the capacity for second order learning to take us to new places and new transformations. We talked about in the conversation the other actors that are being brought into the space for co-creation. So the young entrepreneurs in industry who are working in innovation in a new and different way. We will touch on that theme later on at another fireside, particularly with Business Finland. So excellent. Thank you for that really interesting discussion.